The re-education chamber smelled of bleach and fear. Sam knew the smell of fear. It was a coppery tang that clung to the back of the throat, a ghost of sweat and adrenaline that no amount of industrial solvent could ever truly scrub away. He pushed his mop across the sterile white floor, the rhythmic slosh-slosh, a meager defense against the silence. This was the third time this week he'd been called to clean Unit 7. The Krell, his towering insect-like supervisors, called it reharmonizing. Sam called it what it was. They took someone in, and the person who came out was not the same. They were quieter. Their eyes were glassy. They were harmonious. He worked his way toward the center of the circular room, beneath the humming array of psychic dampeners. The Krell did not use physical punishment. They considered it crude. They simply reached into your mind and tidied up. They smoothed out the jagged edges of passion, snipped the tangled threads of individuality, and erased anything that did not serve the serene, silent harmony of the consortium. They were gardeners of the mind, and they treated rebellion like a weed. Sam's mop head bumped against something small. It was not a stain. It was solid. He nudged it with the toe of his gray uniform boot. It was a shoe. A child's shoe no bigger than his hand. It was red, with a worn strap and a scuffed toe. A little plastic star was still stuck to the side, its glitter long gone. He had not seen a child wear anything so bright, so defiantly frivolous in years. All sanctioned footwear was gray. All clothing was gray. Color was disharmonious. His breath hitched. He glanced at the observation window, a dark sliver in the white wall. Was the overseer watching? He could feel the familiar low-grade psychic pressure of its presence, a constant headache that was the background music of his life. He stooped, his joints creaking, and his hand closed around the shoe. The worn synthetic leather was still warm. Or maybe that was just his imagination. He straightened up, the shoe hidden in his large, calloused palm. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic, disharmonious drum solo. This was a crime, possessing an unsanctioned item. An item of color. An item that belonged to a child who had been brought here. He thought of his wife, Anya. She used to hum. Old Earth songs, tunes from a time before the Krell came and brought their gift of peace. A gift no one had asked for. She hummed while she worked, while she cooked their nutrient paste, while she slept. It was a harmless thing, but it was not harmonious. One day the humming stopped. The person who came back to their small apartment had Anya's face and Anya's body, but her eyes were empty rooms. The music was gone. He shoved the little red shoe into the deep pocket of his coveralls. It felt like a block of hot lead against his thigh. He finished his work, the lop strokes now jerky and uneven. He dumped the bucket of gray water down the drain, the sound echoing in the oppressive quiet. As he pushed his cart out of the chamber, the heavy door sliding shut behind him, he felt the overseer's attention focus on him. It was not a look. It was a mental touch, cold and probing, like a surgeon's scalpel sliding into his thoughts. The sanitation unit shows elevated metabolic rates. A voice whispered directly into his skull. It was not a voice of words, but of pure meaning, translated by his brain into a flat, metallic tone. Heart rate is disharmonious. Adrenaline levels are suboptimally high. Is there a malfunction? Unit Samuel -734. Sam kept his eyes fixed on the long white corridor ahead. He focused on the simple mechanics of pushing the cart. Left foot, right foot, the squeak of the wheels. He built a wall in his mind, a flimsy thing made of mundane thoughts. The floor needs waxing. The dispenser in level 3 is clogged again. The taste of this morning's nutrient paste was blander than usual. Q repeated. Is there a malfunction? No, Overseer, Sam whispered, his own voice sounding rough and alien in the silence. Cartwheel is sticking. It is inefficient. There was a long pause. The mental pressure intensified, searching for the lie. Sam felt a cold sweat trickle down his spine. He focused on the image of a squeaky wheel, poured all his mental energy into the fiction. The wheel needed grease. It was an annoyance, a tiny, acceptable pocket of disharmony. Acknowledge, the voice finally said, and the pressure receded. Address the inefficiency. Harmony must be maintained. Sam nodded to the empty air and pushed his cart down the hall. His hand clamped over the pocket containing the shoe. He had gotten away with it, for now, but something had broken inside him. A long dormant wire had been tripped. The Krell believed they understood everything. They had catalogued every species, analyzed every biological process, mapped every neurological pathway. They understood the mechanics of life, but they did not understand why a man would risk everything for a memory, triggered by a lost shoe. They did not understand the illogical, chaotic, and utterly human blaze that had just been kindled in the gray emptiness of his soul. They called it a sickness. Sam was beginning to think it might be the only cure. The station hung in the blackness like a shard of bone. Orvec 4 was a mid-level processing hub, one of thousands that formed the backbone of the Krell consortium. Its corridors were sterile, its air was recycled, and its population was compliant. Sam had lived here for 10 years since Earth had been fully harmonized and designated a Class G sanctuary world, a museum piece of a chaotic past. He, along with millions of other humans, had been relocated to serve the consortium in roles deemed suitable for their limited emotional natures. Janitors, mechanics, waste disposal technicians, cogs in a machine so vast they could never hope to see the whole of it. He shared his small, windowless cabin with the lingering ghost of his wife. He kept her picture, an unsanctioned item he had managed to hide for years. In it, she was smiling, a real smile that crinkled the corners of her eyes, a disharmonious expression of untamed joy. Now, the child's red shoe sat beside the picture frame in the back of his maintenance locker. 2 pieces of a forgotten world, 2 pieces of evidence in a crime he was committing just by remembering. His work shift ended, and he moved with the silent, gray-clad crowd toward the nutrition center. No one spoke. The Krell discouraged unnecessary vocalizations. Communication was to be efficient and purposeful. Small talk was a symptom of a disordered mind. The only sound was the soft shuffling of thousands of boots on the metal floor. Among the humans walked other species enslaved by the harmony. The Lumina, tall, willowy beings who resembled plants, and communicated through subtle shifts in the light patterns on their skin. The Groll, squat, rocky creatures whose thoughts moved as slowly as glaciers. They had all accepted the Krell's peace. They were quiet. They were stable. Only the humans seemed to have a faint, vibrating tension beneath their placid surfaces. A spring coiled so tight it was almost invisible. As he collected his tray of beige nutrient paste, a hand brushed his. It was a deliberate touch. Sam flinched, looking up. It was a woman from the hydroponics division, Elara. She was younger than him, with sharp, dark eyes that always seemed to be seeing something more than what was there. She never looked down. That was the first thing he'd noticed about her. She met the gaze of the Krell drones that patrolled the halls. It was a terrifying, reckless habit. "Your sector had a reharmonizing," she said, her voice a low murmur, barely audible over the hum of the air recyclers. It was not a question. Sam's blood went cold. "I perform my duties," he said, the standard non-committal response. Her eyes flickered to him, a spark of something, impatience, maybe, or pity, in their depths. They say it was a family this time, a new arrival from a fringe colony that hadn't been fully integrated. They were caught teaching their child a song. Sam's hand tightened on his tray. A song, just like Anya. He felt the phantom weight of the red shoe in his pocket. He wanted to walk away, to disappear back into the gray, anonymous crowd. Talking to her was dangerous. She was a loose nail in a perfectly smooth floor. "Harmony must be maintained," he recited, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. Elara let out a soft, bitter laugh. "Is that what you call it? This walking sleep?" She leaned closer, her shoulder brushing his. "They think they've won, don't they? They think they've scrubbed us clean." Her fingers, quick as a striking snake, pressed something small and hard into his palm as she took her own tray. Compartment 9. Ventilation shaft C, -12. Midnight. If you are tired of sleeping. Then she was gone, melting back into the crowd. Sam stood frozen for a second, his heart a frantic bird in his chest. He looked down at his hand. It was a data chip, no bigger than his thumbnail. An illegal, primitive piece of technology. The Krell used psychic relays for data transfer. Physical media was for barbarians, for criminals. He slid the chip into his pocket, the smooth plastic clicking against the hard shape of the shoe. He felt dizzy, the room tilting slightly. He could throw it away. He could go to the nearest Krell drone and report her. That would be the smart thing to do. The harmonious thing to do. They might even reward him. A larger living space. A better grade of nutrient paste. He took his tray to an empty spot at a long metal table and began to eat. The paste was tasteless as always, but he barely noticed. His mind was a whirlwind. Compartment 9. Ventilation shaft C, -12. Midnight. It was a suicide mission. A fool's errand. What could one woman and a data chip do against an empire that spanned the galaxy? An empire that could read your very thoughts. But then he thought of Anya's empty eyes. He thought of the child who had owned a red shoe and been punished for learning a song. He thought of the silent, shuffling crowds and the endless, sterile white corridors. He thought of the peace the Krell had given them, a peace that felt exactly like death. He looked at his reflection in the polished surface of the table. A gray man in a gray world. And for the first time in a very long time, he felt a surge of something hot and sharp and utterly, beautifully disharmonious. He felt anger. He knew with a certainty that terrified him that he would be at ventilation shaft C, -12 at midnight. The sleeping man was beginning to wake up. Sam spent the next few hours in a state of controlled panic. Every squeak of his cart in the empty corridors sounded like an alarm. Every silent passage of a Krell drone felt like a direct accusation. The data chip in his pocket was a tiny sun, burning with illicit heat. He imagined the overseer's mental voice crashing into his mind at any moment, exposing him. The unit possesses contraband. The unit is conspiring. The unit is disharmonious. He would be dragged to Unit 7, and the man who came out would not remember Elara, or the chip, or the little red shoe. The thought was a cold hand squeezing his heart. He needed a place to think, a place where the ever-present psychic hum of the Krell was weakest. He pushed his car toward the old engine core, a section of the station that was mostly automated and rarely patrolled. It was loud down there. The thrum of the station's ancient plasma drives a physical vibration in the floor and in his bones. The noise was a shield. The Krell disliked such chaotic brute force mechanics. They preferred their silent, elegant gravity drives. But the old core was necessary for planetary stabilization, a relic the consortium hadn't gotten around to replacing. He found a small access tunnel behind a coolant pump and ducked inside. The air was hot and smelled of ozone. He switched on his utility light, the beam cutting a small circle in the darkness. He sat on the cold deck plating, his back against a thick bundle of cables, and finally allowed himself to breathe. He pulled out the data chip. It was black and featureless. What could be on it? Military secrets? Blueprints for a weapon? It seemed absurd. Humanity had no weapons that could scratch the paint on a Krell warship. His mind drifted back to a reorientation lecture he'd been forced to attend years ago. A Krell overseer had stood before a silent auditorium of humans, its multifaceted eyes sweeping over them. It had tried to explain the concept of harmony. Your species is unique, the translated thought had echoed in their heads. You are plagued by a conceptual virus you call freedom. You believe the individual is paramount. This belief is a biological error. It creates friction, it creates waste. It creates suffering. Imagine a symphony where every instrument plays its own tune, ignoring the conductor, ignoring the score. The result is not music. It is noise. It is chaos. We have silenced the noise. We have given you the gift of the symphony. At the time, the logic had seemed cold, but undeniable. Humanity's history was a catalogue of wars, of conflicts born from competing desires and ideologies. The Krell had ended all of it. They had brought peace. But the Overseer had not understood. A symphony was beautiful, but so was a lone voice singing in the dark. So was a jazz improvisation, a frantic, messy, glorious creation of a single moment. The Krell saw a virus, humans called it a soul. He had to see what was on the chip. His standard issue work slate had a port, an obsolete feature the Krell hadn't bothered to remove. It was a risk. If the slate was networked, the moment he accessed the chip, they would know. He checked the settings. The work slates had their psychic uplinks disabled. They were considered too primitive for direct interface. They connected through hardline ports at designated workstations to upload maintenance logs. If he kept it disconnected, he should be safe. He hoped. With trembling fingers, he slid the chip into the port. The screen on his slate flickered. A single file icon appeared. It was not labeled with a standard consortium designation. It was a single hand-drawn symbol. A jagged 5-pointed star. He hesitated for a long moment, the thrum of the engine core a deep drumbeat counting down his life. Then he tapped the icon. It was not blueprints, it was not battle plans, it was chaos. A blast of sound erupted from the slate's small speaker, a wailing guitar and a pounding drum, so loud and violent it made him jump. A man's voice screamed words he couldn't understand, full of rage and passion. The screen flickered with images. A crowd of people at a concert, their faces ecstatic. A lone protester standing in front of a tank. A painter splattering a canvas with vibrant clashing colors. A woman laughing so hard she cried. Then the music cut out, replaced by a voice. A woman reciting poetry, her words weaving a story of love and loss. It shifted again, to a clip from an old movie, a hero in rags shouting about rebellion and hope. Then the sound of children playing, their shrieks of joy, a cacophony of pure, unadulterated life. It was a flood. A tidal wave of human culture. It was art, music, history, emotion. It was everything the Krell had tried to erase. It was messy, illogical, and inefficient. And it was the most beautiful thing Sam had seen in a decade. He watched, mesmerized as the images flashed by. A database of defiance. A library of the human spirit. And then he felt it. A faint static at the edge of his consciousness, the same strange whisper he'd been catching for weeks. Only now, it was stronger. It wasn't the Krell. It was something else. As a scene of a revolutionary speech played on the screen, the static sharpened into a fleeting thought, not his own. I remember that. I remember hope. It was gone as quickly as it came, a ghost of a thought from a stranger. He realized with a stunning clarity what he was hearing. It was the background noise of other human minds, the tiny, secret sparks of rebellion they kept hidden. The Krell filtered it out, dismissed it as neural noise. But it was there. A secret, silent network of shared memory and longing. The data on the chip wasn't just data. It was an amplifier. It was a key, designed to unlock thoughts that had been buried for a generation. The sleeping were not just waking up. They were starting to dream together. The sound of the wailing guitar was still echoing in Sam's head when he made his way to ventilation shaft C-12. He had wiped the slate and hidden the chip again, but the contents were burned into his memory. The images, the sounds, the raw, untamed emotion of it all. It was like he had been living in a black and white world, and someone had just shown him color. He felt energized, terrified, and more alive than he had in years. He found the designated shaft in a dimly lit maintenance corridor. The cover was held on by 4 magnetic locks. He used his technician's key to release them and pulled the heavy grate aside. A rush of cool, recycled air washed over him. He peered into the darkness. A light flickered on below, revealing Ilara's face, her features sharp in the gloom. "You came," she said, her voice echoing slightly in the metal tube. "I wasn't sure you would." "What's on that chip?" Sam asked, his voice a harsh whisper. "What is all that?" "It's us," she said simply, a small smile playing on her lips. "It's everything they tried to take away. We call it the archive." He slid into the shaft, pulling the grate closed above him. A ladder was bolted to the side, and he climbed down to the small junction where she waited. They were surrounded by a tangle of pipes and conduits, the station's guts. "Who is we?" he asked. "More than you think. Fewer than we need," she replied, her eyes serious. "There are pockets of us, on this station, on other stations, on the colony worlds, people who remember, people who refuse to be harmonious. We've been building the archive for years, passing it from hand to hand, adding to it. A piece of music from one person, a story from another. It's the most dangerous weapon in the galaxy." "It's music and pictures," Sam said, still struggling to understand. "The Krell have warships that can crack a planet. How do you fight that with a song?" "You are thinking like they want you to think," Ilara said, her intensity making him lean back. "You don't fight a psychic hive mind with lasers. Their greatest strength is their shared consciousness, their harmony. They are all one. But that's also their greatest weakness. They are rigid, they are logical. They have no defense against chaos." She pointed at his head. "What they do in the re-education chambers. They're just filtering your mind. They can't truly erase who you are. The memories, the emotions, they're still in there, buried deep. The archive. That noise you heard, it's like a tuning fork for those buried parts. It resonates with them. It wakes them up. Sam thought of the whispers, the stray thoughts he had heard. I remember hope. I heard something, he said, when I played the chip. A voice. It wasn't mine. Ilara's eyes widened. You are a sensitive, she breathed. We've heard rumors there were people like you. Most of us just feel it, a sense of not being alone, but you can actually hear the chatter. The Krell psychic field is supposed to block all that, but you can hear through the static. It was a stunning revelation. The whispers weren't a sign of his own mind fraying. They were real. He was tuning into a hidden frequency, a wavelength of human defiance. What is the plan? Sam asked, his role in this strange war suddenly feeling much more critical. What do you want me to do? The Krell are efficient, Ilara explained, her voice dropping lower. All their primary systems are interconnected. The environmental controls, the communications array, the navigation computers. They're all linked through a central psychic relay. It's how the overseers manage the station. It's a direct line into their collective mind. She looked at him, her gaze unwavering. We're going to give them our symphony, all of it. We are going to upload the entire archive directly into that relay. Sam stared at her, horrified. That's insane. The relay is in the command nexus. It's the most secure part of the station. It's swarming with Krell. They won't be expecting a sanitation tech, Ilara said. You have access codes for areas most of us can't get near. You can move through the station without raising suspicion. You are invisible to them. That's your strength. The idea was audacious. It was suicidal. It was the most terrifying thing he had ever heard. To walk into the heart of Krell power and unleash a virus of pure, unadulterated humanity. It was like trying to cure a fever by setting the patient on fire. Why me? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Because I saw you, she said softly. A few weeks ago, an overseer was berating Illumina for its light patterns being erratic. Everyone else kept their heads down, but you watched. For just a second, you stopped and watched. And I saw the look in your eyes. It wasn't fear, it was anger. The same anger I feel. The kind of anger that makes you do stupid, irrational, glorious things. She held out her hand. The Krell think freedom is a disease. We're going to prove them right. We're going to start an epidemic. Sam looked at her outstretched hand, then thought of the sterile silence of his life, of Anya's empty gaze, of the little red shoe. He was just a janitor, a gray, invisible man. But maybe an invisible man was exactly what a revolution needed. He took her hand. It was warm and strong. For the first time, he felt the stirrings of an emotion he had long thought dead. It was a chaotic, illogical, and completely disharmonious feeling. It was hope. The next 48 hours were a blur of nervous energy and meticulous planning. Sem went about his duties, mopping floors and cleaning vents, but his mind was elsewhere, mapping corridors, memorizing guard patrols, and running through the plan Ilara had laid out. He was no spy, no soldier. He was a man who knew the station's service routes better than anyone. He knew which conduits were shielded from psychic sensors, which maintenance hatches had faulty locks, and which power junctions flickered at regular intervals, creating brief blind spots in the surveillance systems. His mundane knowledge had suddenly become a set of military assets. He met Ilara twice more in the humming darkness of the ventilation shafts. She was the hub of the small resistance cell. a communications tech named Ren, who could create a brief loop in the Nexus's security logs. An old cargo hauler named Jia, who could stage a minor coolant leak on the other side of the station as a diversion. They were a handful of ordinary people, armed with nothing but their jobs and a desperate desire for something more. The fear was a constant metallic taste in his mouth. During a cleaning cycle on the upper decks, a Krell overseer paused as he passed. The familiar, cold probe of its mind washed over him. Sam focused on the grime on the floor, on the precise mixture of solvent and water in his bucket, on the ache in his lower back. He made his mind a fortress of the mundane. The unit's neural patterns remain agitated. The Krell's thought voice stated. It felt less like a question and more like a diagnosis. There is a recurring emotional signature. It is classified under the human lexicon as grief. This is an inefficient state. It inhibits optimal function. Yes, Overseer, Sam said aloud, his voice steady. It is an old malfunction. It is contained. Disharmony, even when contained, can be a contagion, the Overseer replied. The memory matrix causing this state will be scheduled for smoothing at your next evaluation. They were going to erase Anya. They were going to tidy up his grief, scrub his soul clean. The threat was not one of punishment, but of erasure. They would take away the one thing that still connected him to the man he used to be. The conversation solidified his resolve. They could not be allowed to win. What they called peace was a theft of the self. The time was set. 0300 station time during the primary sleep cycle and shift change. Jia would trigger the coolant leak at 0255. Ren would loop the security feed for the Nexus corridor for exactly 3 minutes, starting at 0301. That was his window. 3 minutes to get to the psychic relay, upload the archive and get out. He prepared himself in the quiet of his small cabin. He didn't have a weapon. He had his technician's key, a multi-tool, and a data chip. He taped the chip to the inside of his wrist, hidden beneath the cuff of his gray uniform. He took one last look at Anya's picture. He looked at the little red shoe. He was not doing this for some grand, abstract concept of freedom. He was doing this for them, for the right to hum a song and wear bright colors. At 245, he slipped out of his cabin and into the silent corridors. The station was hushed, the lighting dimmed. The only sounds were the ever-present hum of life support and the distant, rhythmic clank of a Krell patrol. He moved through service tunnels and access ways, a ghost in the machine he knew so well. At 0255, a low pulsing alarm began to sound from the station's far side. A calm synthesized voice announced a level 2 coolant leak in the cargo bay. Non-essential personnel were to remain in their quarters. Maintenance teams were dispatched. It was Jia's diversion. Sam saw 2 Krell drones glide swiftly past the end of his corridor, heading toward the emergency. He reached the Nexus corridor at 0300. It was a wide, white hallway, forbiddingly clean. A single Krell guard stood motionless before the heavy blast door of the command Nexus. It was a Praetorian larger than the standard drones, its chitinous armor a darker shade of gray. Its mind was a silent, powerful beacon of pure, unwavering focus. There was no way past it. Sam's heart sank. The plan hadn't accounted for a Praetorian. Ren's security loop would hide him from the cameras, but it wouldn't hide him from that thing. He pressed himself into an alcove, his mind racing. It was over. He had failed before he had even begun. Then he remembered what Alara had said. You are a sensitive. He could hear the chatter. What if he could do more than listen? What if he could broadcast? He closed his eyes, ignoring the Praetorian. He focused past the overwhelming hum of the Krell's harmony. He searched for the faint, crackling static of the human network. He found it, a tiny thread of sound in a vast ocean of silence. He focused on a single powerful thought, a memory, the sound of the screaming guitar from the archive. He imagined it not as a memory, but as a real sound, and he pushed it out with all his mental strength. He aimed it not at the Praetorian, but at the empty space around it. He was creating noise. He was creating chaos. The Praetorian's head tilted, a barely perceptible movement. The calm, psychic pressure in the hallway wavered, just for a second. He pushed harder. He added the pounding drums. He added the angry, screaming voice. He threw in images from the archive. The laughing woman. The protesteur before the tank. The flash of vibrant paint. He didn't know if it was working, if he was doing anything at all. He felt a sharp pain behind his eyes, like a hot needle. A trickle of blood ran from his nose. Then at 0301 precisely, the corridor's main lights flickered and dimmed slightly. Ren's loop was active. It was now or never. Sam opened his eyes. The Praetorian was still standing there, but it was not perfectly still anymore. It was twitching. Its great multi-jointed arms trembled slightly. Its psychic presence was no longer a smooth, calm ocean. It was a storm of static and confusion. Sam had not attacked it directly. He had simply created a bubble of pure, unadulterated human chaos around it, and the Krell mind, built for harmony, could not process it. It was like trying to solve a complex math problem. While a dozen people screamed in your ear, Sam ran. He sprinted down the wide corridor, his soft-soled boots making no sound. The Praetorian did not turn. It remained frozen, locked in a battle with the psychic noise bombs Sam had set off in its vicinity. He reached the Nexus door and swiped his key. A panel slid open, revealing the input port for the psychic relay. It was a crystalline socket, glowing with a soft inner light. He pulled the chip from his wrist, his fingers clumsy with adrenaline. He shoved it into the port. The effect was instantaneous and violent. The moment the archive hit the relay, the station screamed, not an alarm, but a raw, psychic shriek that tore through every mind on Ovik 4. Sam was thrown back against the far wall, his head exploding with pain. The lights in the corridor strobed wildly, then went out, plunging him into darkness, lit only by the frantic pulsing glow of the relay port. The data was a virus, a torrent of chaotic information flooding the Krell's perfectly ordered network. Love, hate, joy, despair, rebellion, art, noise. A billion conflicting human emotions poured into the serene lake of the Krell's collective consciousness. And the lake began to boil. The Praetorian guard convulsed, its long limbs flailing. It slammed against the wall, then crumpled to the floor, motionless. Doomed the hall. He heard the sounds of other Krell drones malfunctioning, their metallic bodies crashing into walls. The psychic shriek softened, replaced by a chorus of a billion whispers. Confused, terrified, individual. Through the pain in his head, Sam heard Ilara's voice. Not through a communicator, but a clear, distinct thought pushed through the newly chaotic psychic channels. It's working, Sam, it's working. Get out of there. He scrambled to his feet, his legs shaking. The 3-minute loop was over. The alarms were real now, blaring at full volume. Red emergency lights bathed the corridor in a hellish glow. He had to run. He ripped the data chip from the port. The archive was in the system now, a ghost in the machine that could not be deleted, and staggered back the way he came. He stumbled through the service tunnels, his nose bleeding freely, his head a universe of agony. But beneath the pain, there was a strange new sound. It was the sound of silence being broken. From the residential levels, he could hear a faint noise growing louder. It wasn't shouting. It wasn't fighting. It was singing. 100 different voices, then 1,000, rising up in a messy, discordant, and utterly glorious chorus. A long-forgotten earthfolk song, a nursery rhyme, a defiant rock anthem. People were opening their doors. They were stepping out into the corridors. They were looking at each other, really looking at each other, for the first time in years. The fear was still there, but it was being drowned out by something else. Sam leaned against a wall in a dark, forgotten corner, listening. The symphony of harmony was dead. The Krell's perfect, silent peace had been shattered. In its place was this beautiful, chaotic, human noise. He had not just started a rebellion. He had reminded a whole station full of people how to be human. He had freed them from the quiet, and now the galaxy would have to deal with the noise. The immediate aftermath was pure chaos. The Krell on Orvet 4 were not dead, but they were broken. Their collective consciousness, the bedrock of their existence, had been shattered into a million terrified individual pieces. The Praetorian in the Nexus corridor had not been physically harmed, but its mind had been. It sat rocking back and forth, emitting a low, mournful hum, its multifaceted eyes staring at nothing. The overseers, the powerful psychic hubs of the Krell hierarchy, were hit the worst. Their minds, once connected to the entire harmony, were now isolated islands, in a storm of incomprehensible data. Some fell into a catatonic state. Others lashed out with raw, unfocused psychic energy, causing lights to flicker and bulkheads to groan. They were like powerful computers that had been fed a paradox, their processors locked in an endless, unwinnable loop. For the other species on the station, the reaction was confusion. The plant-like Lumina, who had lived for generations in a state of placid acceptance, began to flicker their skin lights in rapid, agitated patterns. They had forgotten their ancient language of light, a language capable of expressing individual identity and emotion. Now faint echoes of it were returning, like a forgotten dream. The slow-thinking, rock-like growl simply stopped, their massive forms becoming inert statues as they tried to process a universe that was no longer predictable and calm. The harmony had been a cage, but for many it had also been a comfortable one. Its absence was terrifying. But for the humans, it was a jailbreak. The singing that had started in the residential blocks swelled into a station-wide phenomenon. People poured from their cabins, their gray uniforms, a stark contrast to the sudden vibrant life in their eyes. They touched each other, they hugged, they cried, they shared stories in loud, excited voices, the words tumbling over each other. Someone found a can of yellow maintenance paint and began scrawling a huge, messy sun on a sterile white wall. Others followed suit, using whatever they could find to leave their mark, to reclaim the space that had imprisoned them. It was not a coordinated military takeover. It was a spontaneous, messy, glorious explosion of suppressed identity. Some found Alara near the hydroponics bay. She was directing a small group of people who were systematically disabling the Krell drones, not by destroying them, but by carefully removing their psychic receiver plates. "Sam, you are alive!" she shouted over the din, throwing her arms around him. He winced as she hugged him, his body aching. "The whole station," he said, looking around in awe. A man was juggling 3 nutrient paste containers. A woman was dancing, a wild spinning dance of pure joy. It's all awake. "The archive didn't just disrupt their network," Ilara said, her eyes blazing with intensity. "It created a new one, a human one. That chatter you could hear? It's a full-blown conversation now. We can all hear it, just a little. A feeling, a sense of solidarity. We're not alone anymore." The station's command structure had evaporated. With the Krell incapacitated, the automated systems were all that kept the station running. And humans were the mechanics. They were the technicians. Within hours, a loose council of people like Ilara, Ren, Jar had taken de facto control of OVEC 4. They were not leaders in the old sense. They were just the ones who knew how the water recyclers worked and how to reboot the air scrubbers. The revolution was being run by the janitors and the plumbers. But their victory was a fragile one. The Krell consortium was vast. OVEC 4 was just one small node. Sooner or later, the wider harmony would notice one of its limbs had gone numb and would send ships to investigate. They had won the battle for the station, but the war for the galaxy was a terrifyingly different prospect. Then, Ren, the communications tech, came running up to them, his face pale but his eyes wide with disbelief. "Ilara, Sam, you need to see this." He led them to the communications hub. The main screen, which usually displayed Krell logistical data, was now a chaotic mess of incoming signals. "The archive," Ren said, pointing at the screen. "When it hit the psychic relay, it didn't just stay on the station. The relay is a faster than light transmitter. It's the backbone of their entire galactic network." The truth of what he was saying dawned on Sam with the force of a physical blow. "It's spreading," he whispered. "Like a plague," Ilara finished, a slow, wondrous smile spreading across her face. "We didn't just upload a file. We released a virus into their central nervous system." On the screen, reports were trickling in from across the sector. A failed shipping convoy in the outer system had gone silent. A garrison on Zelos -3 was reporting mass psychic dissonance. A deep space listening post had begun broadcasting a stream of what Krell analysts were calling chaotic emotional data. It was a recording of an old Earth Blues song. The song was the proof. The archive was replicating, spreading from mind to mind, from relay to relay, through the Krell's own FTL network. Humanity's messy, illogical, emotional soul was a contagion. And it was moving at the speed of thought. They had not just liberated a single station. They had fired a shot that would be heard in the minds of every Krell in the galaxy. The tyrants who prided themselves on their perfect mental control were being overwhelmed by the one thing they could never understand: the beautiful, terrible chaos of a free mind. The Freedom Plague, as it was later dubbed by a renegade historian on a newly liberated colony, swept through the Krell consortium with terrifying speed. It was not a war of ships and explosions, but one of collapsing ideologies. The Krell's FTL psychic network, their greatest tool of control, became the artery of their own undoing. Every Krell mind it touched was irrevocably changed. On the capital world of Krell Prime, a planet-sized city of perfect silent order, the harmony shattered. In the Grand Conclave, hundreds of elder overseers, beings whose minds were woven into the very fabric of the consortium, simply ceased to function. Their individual consciousnesses, suppressed for millennia in favor of the collective, re-emerged into a universe of blinding, painful complexity. They were ancient beings reborn as infants, screaming into the psychic void. Fleets of Krell warships, crewed by thousands of telepathically linked minds, lost their cohesion. A battle cruiser would suddenly veer off course because its navigation officer was overwhelmed by a newfound and terrifying sense of acrophobia. A fear of heights triggered by the star-dusted abyss outside the view screen. A squadron of destroyers would fail to engage a target because their weapons officers were suddenly paralyzed by the abstract concept of empathy for their enemies. The tyranny did not fall, it dissolved. The effect on the other subjugated races was just as profound. On Lumina Secundus, the gentle, plant-like beings, whose skin light had been a uniform placid green for centuries, began to glow. They flickered with brilliant, individual patterns of blue and purple and fiery orange. They were rediscovering their own language, their own art. An elder Lumina, for the first time in its long life, consciously shifted its light to form the ancient symbol for I, a concept that had been considered obscene heresy. It was a declaration of selfhood that rippled through its people like a wave. In the mining colonies of the Grow, the slow, rocky beings began to move with purpose. For generations, they had mined ore for the consortium, their actions dictated by the harmony. Now, a Grow miner, tasked with carving a perfectly uniform block of stone, paused. It looked at the raw, uncarved rock face. Then, using its powerful claws, it began to etch a shape. A crude, asymmetrical spiral. It was not efficient. It served no purpose. It was the Growl's first piece of art in 1,000 years. It was its signature. Back on Orvec 4, Sam watched the galaxy change from the station's main observation deck. The news came not in official reports, but in a flood of liberated signals. A broadcast from a human resistance cell on Proxima B, playing rock music on a continuous loop. A message from a coalition of newly freed species in the Sirius system, formally declaring their independence and asking for help in rebuilding their own cultures. The Krell Empire was crumbling, not into dust, but into 1 trillion bewildered individuals. Elara stood beside him, her face illuminated by the distant stars. "We did it," she whispered. "We actually did it." "What happens now?" Sam asked. The question hung in the air between them. The galaxy was free, but it was also in chaos. Supply lines were broken. Governments had vanished. Jade-old rivalries, suppressed by the Krell's Iron Peace, were sure to re-emerge. "Now comes the hard part," Elara said, her expression sober. "Now we have to learn to live with all this freedom. It's going to be messy. It's going to be messy. It's going to be loud. People are going to disagree. There will be arguments. There might even be fights. It won't be harmonious." Sam thought about that. He looked at the corridor behind them. The once pristine white walls were now covered in murals, graffiti, poems, and handprints. A group of people were in a heated debate over how to ration the remaining nutrient paste. Someone else was trying to teach a confused-looking Lumina how to play a makeshift drum. It was chaotic. It was inefficient. It was noisy. "No," Sam said, a small smile touching his lips. "It won't be harmonious. It'll be human." He felt a strange sensation, a faint psychic touch at the edge of his awareness. It wasn't the cold, monolithic presence of the old Krell mind. This was different. It was hesitant, questioning, frightened. "Q," the thought whispered into his mind. It was fragmented, weak. "What is this feeling? It hurts." Sam realized it was a Krell. one of the newly born individuals, reaching out from the wreckage of its former self, lost and terrified. He recognized the feeling it was trying to describe. He had felt it every day for 10 years. He closed his eyes and focused, pushing a single gentle thought back into the darkness. A single word. There was a long pause and then a flicker of another, even more confusing emotion from the Krell mind. Why would you share it? Sam didn't have a logical answer. It was not an efficient or harmonious thing to do. It was just human. He broadcasted another thought, not of words, but of pure feeling. The memory of Anya's smile, the defiant joy of the child's red shoe, the fierce, desperate hope he felt when he plugged the archive into the heart of the Empire. He was offering a hand to his former captor, not in forgiveness, but in shared experience. The great terrible gift humanity had given the galaxy was the gift of self. And with the self came all of it. The joy and the pain, the love and the grief, the freedom and the fear. The Krell had wanted to save the galaxy from chaos. Instead, humanity had saved the galaxy from a sterile peace, and in doing so, had inflicted its own beautiful, terrible condition upon everyone. The silence was over. 1 billion new voices were learning to speak, and the universe would never be quiet again. A year passed. The galaxy did not descend into a firestorm of war, as some had feared. Nor did it ascend into a utopian paradise. It became what it had always been, underneath the Krell's smothering blanket of harmony. A vast, complicated, and messy place. The consortium was a memory, its perfect white structures now canvases for the art of 100 liberated species. Trade routes were re-established, not by edict, but by clumsy, hopeful negotiation. Old grudges flared, but were often tempered by the shared memory of oppression. The freedom humanity had unleashed was a difficult, unwieldy thing, but it was real. Orvec 4, now renamed Beacon, became a chaotic hub of this new galaxy. Humans, Lumina, and Grawl worked side by side, arguing and collaborating in equal measure. The station was no longer sterile. It smelled of strange alien spices, of spilled paint, of human sweat. It rang with the sounds of 12 different languages and 100 different kinds of music. It was loud, vibrant, and perpetually in a state of semi-organized chaos. It felt like home. Sam was no longer a sanitation technician. No one was really. Jobs were less about assigned roles and more about what needed doing. He found he had a knack for fixing things, for understanding the old complex machinery that kept the station alive. He was an engineer now, a title he had given himself. He spent his days elbow deep in the station's guts, keeping the lights on and the air breathable. The Krell were still there. They were the galaxy's broken children. Most kept to themselves on their now isolated worlds, grappling with the terrifying onset of individuality. They were no longer a threat. They were a galactic tragedy. Some, however, began to venture out hesitantly. They were fast learners, and they were trying to understand the plague that had destroyed their civilization. They were trying to understand emotion. One of them came to Beacon. It arrived in a small, unarmed scout ship, broadcasting a message of peaceful intent. Its name, a new and clumsy concept for it, was Unit Primasks. It was one of the former overseers from Krell Prime, one of the few who had not gone catatonic. It wanted to speak to the ones who had started it all. It wanted to speak to Sam and Ilara. They met in the observation deck, the same place where they had watched their rebellion unfold. The Krell, who now preferred the pronoun it, stood tall and imposing as ever, but its presence was different. The overwhelming psychic pressure was gone, replaced by a nervous, questioning aura. "You destroyed us," Unit Prime asks projected, its thought voice no longer a flat translation, but tinged with a strange new emotion Sam recognized as sorrow. "We freed you," Elara countered, her arms crossed. She still did not trust them. "You call this freedom?" the Krell asked. It gestured with a long, three-jointed arm to the chaotic station around them. "This noise, this inefficiency, this constant conflict of desires. We were a symphony. You have turned us into a cacophony." "A symphony where no one gets a solo is just a drone," Sam said quietly. He had spent a lot of time thinking about this. "We didn't give you conflict. We gave you choice. The conflict comes from what you do with it." "I feel fear," the Krell projected. "I feel loneliness. These feelings are flaws in the code. They serve no purpose." "They serve you," Sam said. "Fear keeps you alive. Loneliness tells you that you need others." He thought for a moment. "It's the price you pay for joy. You can't have one without the other." The Krell seemed to ponder this, its great head tilting. "The archive. The data you unleashed. I have analyzed it. It is full of contradictions. Stories of great love and great hatred. Songs of triumph and songs of despair. Why do you celebrate your own dysfunction?" "It's not dysfunction," Sam said. "It's just the whole story. You can't have a story with only happy endings. It wouldn't mean anything." He stepped forward, unafraid. He held out the small, worn red shoe he still carried with him everywhere. This belonged to a child. The Krell took her and her family away because they sang a song. You thought the song was the problem. You were wrong. The problem was a system that was afraid of a song. The Krell extended a hesitant manipulator claw and gently touched the shoe. A wave of confusion and a faint echo of Sam's own grief washed over him from the Krell's mind. So much pain for such a small thing, it projected. "And so much joy," Sam replied. "You just couldn't see it." Unit Prime Masks retracted its claw. It stood in silence for a long time, the myriad facets of its eyes seeming to look at the stars, at the bustling station, at the two humans before it. Finally, it turned its gaze to Sam. "I do not understand humanity's obsession with freedom," it projected. The thought was slow, deliberate. "But I am beginning to understand its power. We sought to impose order on the universe. You unleashed it." The Krell paused. And for the first time, Sam felt a flicker of something from its mind that was not fear or sorrow or confusion. It was a strange, new, and terrifyingly potent emotion for a Krell to feel. It was curiosity. "Teach me," the Krell projected. "Teach me the whole story." Sam looked at Elara. She gave a slow, cautious nod. The war was over. The long, difficult, and noisy work of peace was just beginning. And it would be a conversation, not a conquest. A shared story between former slaves and their broken, bewildered masters. The galaxy was free, and now everyone in it had to learn what that truly meant.